Now, we've seen this deal with Donald Trump and NATO in regards to Greenland. Does this show that Trump always backs down or always chickens out, this kind of taco phrase that people are using? Or is this 4D chess, was this a great example of the Dunroe Doctrine?
I think the taco thing is wishful thinking by a bunch of Democrat Wilsonians. I mean, they don't understand a fundamental fact about Donald Trump, and biography is everything. I mean, my political risk firm, one of our secrets to success over our kind of hapless Wilsonian rivals is that we actually take history seriously, and biography is part of that. If you can figure out enough about a man, his history, and the context, you're going to figure out what's going to happen. Donald Trump is a New York property developer. New York property developers have a way of working that is different than the mannered European diplomats who have accomplished nothing over the last 2 generations. That's that you ask for the stars and you end up with the moon. Let's remember that everyone, since time began, has been criticizing Europe, for instance, about its defense spending. The elegant Obama, the most overrated politician of our era, rightly, in term paper fashion, got this right, and then accomplished nothing, being polite to Europeans and lying to them at cocktail parties. Rather, Donald Trump says, if you don't do exactly what I want, I'm leaving NATO tomorrow. Hysteria ensues in The Guardian and elsewhere. The Europeans get their act together. And then he says, well, actually, I won't leave, but you have to spend 3.5% of GDP in the near term. And, five's the fake number, but really 3.5%. And so Europeans say, aha, he backed down. He didn't leave NATO. It's a taco. The guy just got a 3.5% commitment from Europeans while Obama accomplished sweet nothing. And this is what he does over and over and over and over again. Is that backing down or is that negotiating? That's what New York property developers do. You ask for the stars and you get the moon. And that's what he's done in Greenland. He's been hysterical. And what will he get? Some sort of deal where resources are going to be allowed to be mined by the Americans while the Danes have done nothing ever to open up the rare earths market there. They're sitting on their hands. Their newfound love for Greenland is beyond hypocrisy. There were forced sterilizations of the Inuit, as there were all over in the United States, by the way, and Canada as well. But let's not pretend they've loved the Inuit up there. This happened into the 1980s. They've done nothing to patrol their waters for the last 70 years. The United States does that at cost, so they're not managing their territory in any sort of sovereign fashion. That's a fiction that really doesn't pass the laugh test, and they've done nothing to deal with the rare earths. And so Donald Trump, going back to the Monroe Doctrine, as you put it, the Dunroe Doctrine, the Trump corollary of the Roosevelt corollary of the Monroe Doctrine is what it is. And it explains what's going on with Marco Rubio in Panama. It explains what's going on in Greenland. It explains what just went on in Venezuela. It's all the same thing. In a multipolar world with the U.S. as chairman of the board, but a lot of other board members, you secure your near abroad. Powers is a wellspring that springs from your people and your neighborhood. That's how spheres of influence work. He's just thrown the Chinese out of Venezuela. They met with Maduro 3 minutes before he was captured. That made a point. He's thrown the Chinese companies out of either end of the Isthmus of Panama, a move Teddy Roosevelt would love. And now he's looking at the do-nothing Danes and saying, either you deal with us on this or we're just going to walk in and take it. And you and 3 dog sleds aren't going to stop us. Cue the hysteria, cue the Davos man going crazy. And now we're talking about a deal that will be based either on Cyprus, where the British have bases and own the specific bits of land on Cyprus around those bases, or Guantanamo Bay, Gitmo, where there are leases that last indefinitely. It's probably the latter, could be either, where the U.S. has an indefinite lease on Cuban property, but in fact, the Cubans in theory own it, but in practice, the Americans have it in perpetuity. That will be the lease. And under the 1951 treaty, they can extend bases. So Trump can go back to his base and say, I have the sovereignty for these specific areas de facto. De jure, the Danes can feel good because, after all the Europeans care about is symbolism anyway. They don't care about doing anything. So everybody's happy with that. And then somebody in The Guardian will snidely say he backed down. It's a taco where he just got leasing rights forever. He just got mineral rights without asking the Danes. He just got exposure to Golden Dome when a missile defense shield is built. He's got everything he wants and de facto has sovereignty over what he needs. Who's the winner there? While the Europeans cosplay about mattering, we care as realists about substance. And on the substance, he's done another ask for the stars, get the moon thing. And this is part of what he does. But the amazing thing is no one seems to notice.
You've talked about The Guardian there. I'm going to read a headline from the New York Times today in response to this deal with Greenland. They declare this:
Equally bad.
China wins as Trump cedes leadership of global economy. This is a quote from the article. Europe and China are in some ways natural allies in an era when the United States has adopted for a nationalist brio. Both remain officially committed to the concept of rules-based international trade, even as China is frequently accused of breaching the details. Both affirm the scientific reality of climate change whilst mobilizing investment and know-how to combat it. How do you respond?
Sore loser Wilsonians whining is how I respond. These are people who were wrong about let's rule the list. I run a political risk firm. We care a lot. We have a revolutionary Jeffersonian approach in the firm. We care about meritocracy. Are you right? Anyone should listen to experts. But if they're wrong about Iraq, Afghanistan, the financial crisis, Libya, the rise of China, the rise of India, the failure of the global war on terror, and where Wuhan was involved in the virus, if you're wrong about the majority of those 8 things in my office, we don't let you make coffee. All right? The New York Times has been wrong about all of that. All of that. Put all their chips on Joe Biden, who wasn't sentient, the greatest scandal of our time, when anyone with eyes could see. And I knew Joe Biden when he was sentient, by the way, and he would come to Europe, and he was annoying, but he showed up. You know, he was a vigorous guy who showed up. The guy, the doddering fool we saw there was run by his staff, as we saw, all of whom are Wilsonians, wedded, like the New York Times and the Guardian, to this failed philosophy. As I say in Europe, the reason my firm is doing well, the reason I have influence in Washington again, the reason realism is back, is because you've made such a mess of the world. And I said, I don't want to be mean in a twittery way. I'm going to tell you what you've done wrong. And I run the list, Stephen, that I've just laid out here. The New York Times was wrong about all of that. Why would anyone listen to them about anything? But let's play their game. Let's pretend meritocracy doesn't matter, although it's the only thing that matters. In a republic, only people who are right should be promoted and people who are wrong should be demoted. That's why we have a better system than, say, believing in an absolute monarchy. That's the difference. But say I'm wrong about everything I've said, which I'm not. Let's follow the logic. And let's use Macron wearing those creepy aviator shades as an example, trying to be the third lead in Top Gun in the volleyball game after Iceman and Mav, okay, but failing miserably there. What did Macron say? Oh my God, I've just discovered I'm a vassal. Okay, well, and I don't want to be a vassal to the Americans. That's appalling and totally unhelpful to us. So please, China, can we be a vassal to you? He's not talking about a renaissance of Europe, which would, at least Carney mentioned, we have to look inwards and make changes inwards, because the political risk, as often is the case, is us. It's in the mirror. Most states are destroyed from within. Gibbon, rise and fall of the Roman Empire. Again, history. Very important to know that. Instead, Macron's like, I want to retain my ridiculous safety net where you can retire at the age of 12. Totally unaffordable. I want to have 5% deficits far as the eye can see without having the American advantage, the exorbitant privilege of getting to print dollars and dominate the world. They have that. They have no military to speak of, and they've taken the serviceable Fifth Republic, which worked pretty well as de Gaulle set it up, and they've made it the bad old Fourth Republic because he was arrogant in his Davos way, didn't like losing European elections, and told the peasants to vote again. And what did they do? They voted him out. And so now we have 3 poles of power and no government at all. It's Fourth Republic chaos. Well done, Emmanuel. You're a genius. Again, I judge people by their results. My firm gives an award once a year called the Miracle to the most overrated statesperson of the year, named after the infamously slow Angela Merkel, who outsourced German energy policy to Russia, trade policy to China, and strategic policy to the United States, thereby emasculating her otherwise functional country. Things are what they are. Macron has failed miserably. Rather than seeing this or making changes, he says, oh my God, I just realized that the United States is dominating us and we're a vassal. Well, this happened 15 years ago, Stephen. I don't know what people are talking about. This didn't happen this morning. You don't get a do-over. We're not 8 years old playing baseball where we don't know the result. Let's just do it again. You either master history or it masters you, and it's mastered Europe and particularly France. 64 quarters of subpar growth, meaning below 1%, 1%, but not 2. You need 2% growth in an advanced industrial country to be successful. The United States is in the threes under Trump's terms. The first quarter doesn't count last year. It was Biden's. The last 3 quarters, well over 3%. You need 2. The European core, France, Germany, Italy, are struggling to get 1. This has happened not once, not twice, but for 64 quarters. I live in Europe and I feel like I'm on the Titanic and no one's talking about the iceberg. The iceberg is 64 quarters of non-growth. You can't run anything if you're in economic decline. And this has been apparent to anyone who, unlike, say, Ian Bremmer in Eurasia or New York Times or The Guardian, who can read numbers and work this out. This is very simple. No military spending. The United States has spent, what, $26 trillion more since 1980 than the Europeans? $26 trillion more, right? Canada has an army the size of the Alabama National Guard. I'm not saying this to be mean. These are facts, all right? This is reality. And so they need to look inwards at what's gone wrong. They are a vassal, but no one has made them a vassal. That's a choice. You chose not to have an army. You chose to have systems where you retire at the age of 12. You chose to have a safety net that's unaffordable. You chose to have 7 times the regulations the United States has. I'm a Jeffersonian and a Republican, Stephen. I think we have way too much regulation, and they have 7 times what we have. Germany has 5 times America's energy costs. They're not 5 times smarter than we are. And the result of this is clear. It's decline. You're going to be a vassal to somebody. That's point 1. It's not the United States doing it. It's what they've done. Second point to the lovely New York Times is, do you really want to be a vassal to China? Let's ask the Uyghurs how that's going. This is a government that's killed roughly 100 million of its people. Let's not forget the Great Leap Forward, the Cultural Revolution, and that Mao is the Ted Bundy of international relations, the single most bloodthirsty human ever to live if we're going to do a body count. And you want to be under them? Let's ask the students in Hong Kong how that's going, the Tibetans how that's going, the Uyghurs in Xinjiang province how that's going. Anyone who says that in Europe has been sitting hating America from the safety of a French cafe for far too long, because the relative dominance, the United States has lied to Europeans, telling them they're important. If anything, we haven't been hard enough. It's not that we've been too hard. That's point 2. And then point 3, rules-based order. This is a fantasy. This has always been the United States at base giving Europe the rules-based order. Europe is the bird that talks about international norms, sitting on the rhino. The rhino that drives the bird are national interests, as they always have been since the Athenians and the Spartans. National interests, national wherewithal, national ability, and blood and treasure backing up foreign policy. That's always been true. Europe has chosen to live in a garden in a fantasy where it's not true, but the reality is, I feel like Colonel Jessup and A Few Good Men. I stand on the wall. I give you the very freedom you use to despise me. And you want me on that wall in places you don't talk to people about. That's what's going on here. It's never been true. Carney got that right. This has always been a fiction. All these constructs are based on power. Power in foreign policy is based on blood and treasure. The 82nd and 101st Airborne Divisions, the American market, which is easily the dominant one in the world. China's even falling away from the American numbers. They're now 67% of American GDP. They used to be 72%. It's gone down. They're peaking, cresting, and falling back. And the graveyard is full of people who thought the Americans were decadent and on their way out. The Kaiser thought that. Hitler thought that. Stalin thought that. Mao thought that. And here we sit. Why? The internal genius and resilience of the market is there. So every single thing in that thing is wrong. The French and the New York Times are not looking inward. You certainly don't want to be a vassal of China if you have to pick between the two. And the rules-based order is a fiction based on American power. It's like they just woke up and realized things I've been saying for 25 years. I feel like I've taken crazy pills and the world just woke up. That's how far behind these failed elites are.
You talked about European icebergs. I want to ask about some Greenlandic icebergs. Why is Greenland so important to the United States?
I think three basic reasons. And again, we forget the geo and geopolitics, another thing these Wilsonians don't do. Geography matters a great deal, and we've just totally taken a nap about teaching it or in America or learning it at all. If you look at a map of the Arctic, which is now becoming less melted, let's not go too far, but less melted, the Northwest Passage, the fabled Northwest Passage is now a reality. You can do that. If you look at a map, the Arctic is an area which has untapped natural resources, particularly rare earths, which drive our modern society. 90% of world's rare earths are processed in China. They're not that rare. The name is a misnomer. They're not that rare, but we just don't want to do the strip mining ecologically that you have to do to get them. And so we've decided not to. And so everyone woke up. The Chinese are behind on semiconductors. They're racing to catch up. That's a longer term and more difficult process. If they're lucky, and I don't think they will be, I think they're a peaking power. That'll take them 20 years or so. But within 10 years, the United States can ramp up and be totally independent of China. But it requires strip mining. We just did a deal with Australia, the United States, to invest in rare earths out in the Australian desert. It's great. MP, it's a company in America, is ramping up to do more. It's the only major rare earths company in the United States. It's doing more to ramp up in the United States, and there's government funding, I'm sure, on the way to help them do that at the moment. But Greenland is another source totally untapped of rare earths, particularly in the south of the country. They're rare earths. It's going to take 5 or 10 years to get them out of there. You can't just snap. It's like Venezuelan oil. You don't snap your finger and deal with 50 years of no pipelines working. It takes billions of dollars in time to do that, but it can be done. And so in, say, 5 years, we can be up and running and get these rare earths out of Greenland. There's no one magic answer. There's no one silver bullet. But this helps us greatly in avoiding dependence on China, our peer superpower competitors. So that's one. Two, anybody who looks at a map can see Greenland is central to the Arctic geostrategically. We need that there. We don't need it being confronted by Russia and China. And in line with the Monroe Doctrine, it's part of the Western Hemisphere. This is part of what we've talked about. So that's two. Geostrategically, it's vital for this opening region, which has vast resources internally. Three, if we're ever going to build Golden Dome and have proper missile defense, it will have to be over Greenland. Again, look at the map. Missiles from Russia would be coming over the Arctic, and they must be shut down ahead of getting to the United States. That's the goal. So Greenland is, again, invaluable in doing so. That's incredibly important as well. So for political reasons, geopolitical reasons, resource reasons, and defense reasons, this is a vital area, and we've just taken an utter nap about our hemisphere in the United States forever. It's been since at least Franklin Roosevelt, since we took the hemisphere seriously. But in this multipolar world of spheres of influence, if you're going to look at something that actually adds value, you would do the Panama Canal, you would do Venezuela for the oil, and you would do Greenland for all the reasons I just laid out. So there's absolutely no doubt it's strategically vital while the Danes sleep through another meal and the United States patrols the waters over Greenland at cost to us. So there has to be some sort of deal that moves this ridiculous system forward.
In response to Donald Trump's threats against Greenland, Denmark and European countries talked about sovereignty. They talked about the fact that Greenlanders didn't want to be taken over by the United States, and they talked about attacks on, Greenland's culture and nationality and the Greenlanders themselves. How do you respond to these arguments around sovereignty and it's the people's will? The Greenlanders get to choose who rules them.
Well, let's start with sovereignty. Sovereignty means that you defend that territory. That's pretty fundamental to sovereignty, and not every state is equally sovereign. There are parts of Africa that don't control their borders. They're not sovereign. There are wars and civil war. Democratic Republic of Congo has never controlled its borders. It's not a fully sovereign country. There's a fantasy and a fiction on a map when we look at that country is as sovereign as we are. It's not. There are civil wars endemically going on. They don't control their own territory. Does Denmark really control Greenland? It hasn't policed Greenland, which is a vast area. It hasn't policed it in 70 years. The United States has done that at cost. And we haven't sent a bill to the Danes, though perhaps we should have, so that we can make sovereignty real. Sovereignty if it's a fiction, nobody's going to take it seriously. The only people who believe in fixed boundaries are, again, the Europeans who've been given a garden to live in while the United States patrols on the wall. Have African boundaries been never changed? Of course they have. Have South African boundaries changed? Yes. Have boundaries in Asia changed? Yes. Let's look at the line of actual control between India and China, where they move all the time slightly. All right. All through history, boundaries have changed. You and I aren't talking, Stephen, about Athens and Sparta anymore. Those boundaries changed. Napoleon changed the boundaries. Everyone changed the boundaries. And the idea that they're fixed in perpetuity is part of this rules-based fiction, this Wilsonian fiction, this failed fiction that was based on American power underwriting it. And the United States is saying that's no longer real. We need these resources in real time. And as to the Greenlanders, let's wait and see us cash a check for what they're going to get out of the rare earths. The joke, I was just in Washington, Stephen, for a week, and I think 4 people said to me, you know what I'm doing? I'm moving to Greenland as soon as possible. Because you're going to get a check for, $1 million for a bunch of people who are Inuits and have never seen remotely that amount of money when it comes out, as they should. It's their resources. I'm all for doing that. But we will develop them, and they will benefit from them, and we will also benefit from them. The Danes benefiting, I could care less about. But let's see how noble the Greenlanders are and how they don't want to take our money when they don't have any, and we offer them $500,000 a pop when there are 30 to 50,000 people living there. I mean, it's a medium-sized American town. They're on this vast landmass where we do all the work and they get a check for $500,000. They're going to say no to the check and say, I'm loyal to the Danes who sterilized my grandmother. I just don't think this is realistic. I think this is a fantasy coming home to roost. Let's ask them when the number is real. Let's ask them when this is real. And we've had basing there, by the way, since 1951 that we're allowed to expand on. All we're doing is trying to make that basing. Donald Trump, again, is a New York property developer. He wants these bases to be, he doesn't want to lease, he wants a right to own, which is what New York property developers do. And there are a lot of advantages. How do we know Denmark won't someday do something crazy? And the example Trump gave, very good one, is up to now, the Europeans have still owe Russia. They're still buying Russian oil and natural gas at a greater percentage than they are subsidizing the Ukrainian war effort. So they're paying the Russians to fight their allies in Ukraine. By my definition, that's crazy. It's at least strategically incoherent. How do we know they're not going to do something stupid with China in the future? We don't know that. Do we trust them not to behave erratically? They are behaving erratically because they're not at the table. They're just realizing they're on the menu. That's how history works. That's how realism works. All the rest of this is a false construct. But Stephen, I guarantee you, when a Greenlander gets a check for $300,000, which is more money than they've ever seen in their life, I wonder what their loyalty will be to people who sterilized their grandmother. I'm not convinced that it will be rock solid. This is theoretical. Trump is trying to make this discussion real.
How real was the threat of US military power?
I think I would put it like this. I mean, Teddy Roosevelt, one of Trump's heroes, got this right. Vague threats are best. And I wouldn't take anything off the table ever. I mean, again, I don't live in a European world where war and norms are not a reality. They are. And I would just simply say one way or the other, we need to have these resources. We are more than willing to discuss how. We are more than willing to have that discussion. But let's start at the end. We need these resources. So was the threat, I think it's New York property developer strategy. Ask for the stars and you get the moon. But ultimately, we were going to have these resources one way or the other. And hopefully now we will get them in the way that I've laid out, which I think probably will suit everyone. But if the Europeans are dumb enough to say no to some sort of deal, this crisis will be back on and quickly because we are realists. In the end, in a real way, for all the reasons I've said, we want those resources.
So Donald Trump obviously used the threat of economic tariffs to get his way in Greenland, not the military. Does that show that the United States' economic power is more important than its military power when it comes to these kind of negotiations with Europe?
It's a very good question. I mean, it's equally important, I'd say. Again, the two things that really move foreign policy beyond Wilsonian New York Times, Eurasia flummery are blood and treasure. And they're equally important. And you can see Donald Trump using both in the hemisphere, the $20 billion currency swap offered to Javier Milei its treasure, saying to the Venezuela, saying to the Argentinians, you get to decide what you do, but if you support a candidate that we strongly think can turn your country around, we will have a $20 billion swap if he has any problem. And if you pick another bankrupt Peronist where you default on your debts for the eighth time in 5 minutes, we won't, which is our sovereign right. You can decide, but you need to know the consequences of that decision. That's a brilliant example of using economic might to get your way. And then Milei won an astounding victory, won 41% of the vote. He has a plurality now in the parliament. He had 3%. And by the way, our firm called that would happen. I'm very proud of that call. When he was at 3 or 4%, that he would win a plurality. The United States used its economic muscle to get what it wanted. And that is equally important. And yes, what Donald Trump has realized, again, the New York Times, The Guardian would say, and they did, Wilsonians say, the world is interdependent. Let's go have lunch. And what they mean by that is because we are dependent, we are equally interdependent, meaning we need to have multilateral institutions and the rule of law and all the things they believe in. What Donald Trump has realized is a very basic realist point. We are interdependent, but we are nowhere near equally interdependent. The United States has by far the greatest market in the world. Everyone wants access to the American market, particularly trading nations that are dependent on it, like Germany and China, want access to the American market. And so the way to get at them is to realize that you need us more than we need you. So this is good realist thinking. He gets beyond this fiction of interdependence that, while true, and while the Guardian would be clapping hysterically, while the New York Times would be nodding sagely, and while everyone at my Council on Foreign Relations would be saying, oh, yes, quite right. It's totally idiotic and misses the point. What Donald Trump got at is the real point, which is that we are not equally dependent on each other. They are far more dependent on us than we on them. And somebody said the Danes are going to take their money and go buy Chinese bonds. And people are laughing about this. First of all, states can't tell individual investors what to do because we're not communists. There's that. Secondly, why would you give up American returns when you have them, which are far greater than anywhere else internally over the last 20 years? You're just going to give it up. You're not going to care about your shareholders. And three, if you do somehow magically get by these things, you would destroy your own economies based as it is on links to the American economy, which is central to the world. Donald Trump has realized all that. They need us more than we need them. So yes, using the economic weapon, geoeconomics, as we call it at the firm, is equally important. And in our modern world, perhaps even more important, but certainly equally important. You see the results in places like Argentina, and you see it again in Greenland. They're willing to back down. It's not that you march in and it's the 19th century and Otto von Bismarck with his spiked helmet is wandering around. What it is understanding that linkages of the world do not mean we are equally interdependent. You are more dependent on America than it is on you for any given country. When I used to have an office in Washington, we'd say, I worked at the Heritage Foundation, and we'd say that the one thing everybody who comes into my office has in common is they think they're more important to America than they are. That in the end, America is the most important piece on the puzzle. That's good, realist stuff. And Donald Trump is taking us back to the realism that founded the country. This is what Alexander Hamilton thought, George Washington thought, Teddy Roosevelt, Andrew Jackson, James Polk, all these people. This is getting back, to use a Beatles term, to American history. This isn't new, this is old, and that's why it's going to work.
It's interesting that the economic sanctions haven't worked against Russia. That seems to be far more based on the military power in that war in Ukraine. But just moving on from that, Donald Trump's foreign policy, the Dunroe Doctrine, as people are calling it, how different is that compared to the kind of post-war US foreign policy, the liberal foreign policy, and the kind of neocons of the early 2000s?
It's a radical revolutionary break. And I think it's time to realize this. My firm's been saying this for 10 years, but people are catching up. And now it's apparent because he's acting based on the policy. And from that strategic philosophy, you see the policy actions all over that we're talking about in Greenland, Venezuela, Panama, Argentina, Iran, all over the world. And the policy is fundamentally different because it puts America at the center of it. Remember, the president swears an oath not to help the world economy, not to help Davos and Davos man, not to secure the rule of law and a rules-based institution system from a bunch of Wilsonians who couldn't make their way out of whatever Four Seasons hotel they're in. That's not what he swears an oath to. It's to the people of the United States, and they've really been forgotten in all this, and that's the Jacksonian base of the party that propelled Donald Trump to victory. And Donald Trump, it's been argued, has been not been very faithful to women and not been very faithful to business partners, et cetera, et cetera. The one group he's been entirely faithful to are his Jacksonian base, and that's why they cut him such slack. And that's why on a bad day, his popularity with the base of the Republican Party is over 80%. It's an extraordinary number. Yes, all the Democrats hate him, but the other piece of the puzzle is all the Republicans love him at a much higher rate than is normal for a politician in the Republican Party. Sometimes, and until recently, it's been in the lower 90s, which is an unheard of number. 92 was where it crested. It's about 87 now. But the reality is because he hews to a few basic ideas that they understand. I am here to support American national interests, first and foremost, first and last. If that helps the broader global community, that's great. And we often do, and we often hope that it will. But we are here for Americans. That's totally different than the neocons who cared about promoting democracy through the barrel of a gun, which is frankly a Trotskyite policy. And indeed, the neocons come out of a Trotsky thing. If you read Irving Kristol's book on neoconservatism, he started as a Trotskyite, and he writes clearly, I still believe in world revolution. Now it's just for democracy. But you cannot impose democracy at the barrel of a gun. That makes no sense at all, as we found out in Iraq and Afghanistan. And the one laugh line I can have to every American I meet when I think of David Frum and Ann Applebaum and these losers who got thousands of people killed, if you say to Americans, do you want your $1 trillion back? They'll laugh hysterically and say, let's do that rather than have Iraq. We have our schools to fix, our roads to fix, our debt to fix. America's full of problems that need creative solutions, money, and fixing. Why in the world are we helping a bunch of guys sitting in armchairs at the council push a theory that makes no sense? The world hasn't been democratic every minute for 1 minute of recorded history. 3,500 years, again, history. This is a utopian nonsense. And so is the Wilsonian view that the United States is there as the global policeman for a bunch of European human rights lawyers like Keir Starmer to run the world when they have no power at all. For the bird to tell the rhino what to do. That's insane. And that no longer works. And so Donald Trump has grasped this early. The Jacksonian and Jeffersonian base of the party are totally down with this, and that's why they love him. Because even when he fails, what he's trying to do is secure American national interests. It's how he talks. It's how he thinks. You do that. You do an America First policy by pushing American national interests through the use of blood and treasure. It's very businesslike. It's very concrete. It's very realist. It goes back to the founding of the country when the United States did a deal with the hated enemy at the time, Stephen, Britain, who had been fighting us in the revolution, but was the ordering power in Washington's like, we're going to do a deal with them because then we're going to inherit all of North America. So we're going to do the deal. I don't care that you're protesting and you don't like it. It doesn't make you feel good. Blue-haired ladies of the time were screaming about that. They said, be loyal to our brave French ally, who were an absolute monarchy, by the way. Washington said, that's crazy. We're here to advance American interests. And they did, and we inherited North America. It worked just as Hamilton thought. That's what's happening here. That's what Donald Trump does. I can't emphasize enough to our viewers what a radical break this is. And that's what makes my job and my life so interesting, because it's a whole new world out there. And if you can see it and follow it, there are all kinds of economic and political opportunities for our clients. And if you don't see it, you'll be Ian Bremmer and you'll be wrong about yet another thing.
If there was ever one man who represents the old order, it is Keir Starmer, the human rights lawyer, the man who is obsessed with international law as a concept, as a philosophy, as a doctrine. He famously is giving away the Chagos Islands to Mauritius, a Chinese ally, because of so-called international law. There was a ruling in international court that Britain should give the Chagos Islands, the sovereignty of that, over to Mauritius. Now, Donald Trump recently has been protesting against this. What do you make of Keir Starmer? What do you make of his obsession with international law? Is it real? That is international law. Is it real? Has it ever been real, this rules-based order?
No, and Keir Starmer, one of the great political risk calls we made was a year ago where he was having his honeymoon, which didn't last very long. It was a very short experience. I'm not sure the wife was happy with that. Keir Starmer, in his honeymoon period, was slightly first in the polls. And we said, looking at him, knowing his biography, knowing his history, that by the end of the year, he would be in third place in the polls. And people laughed at us. They said, you're crazy. Who's going to? That's never happened in all of recorded British polling history that one of the two major parties was third at the bottom of 1 year's polling. And I said, messed up as the Tories were, and look, I would naturally be a reformed Tory person, but I know the Tories, and they really did mess things up over 15 years. But in 1 year, he's less popular than they were in 15. My God, does that take some doing? And we said, he will be less popular and be replaced by the Tories in reform. One of the great calls we got right last year. Our call this year is he won't be in power after the May elections. It won't matter because the rest of them believe this human rights nonsense, but he won't be in power because the three basic problems in Europe, which are all elite, Wilsonian driven, if you don't grow, you have a huge problem. Your people don't like you. If you have unfettered, unassimilated immigration, I'm from a nation of immigrants. We're all for it. No one ever talks about the word assimilation, which can be explained simply as my mother would, my house, my rules. If you come to my house, you play by my rules, or you don't come to my house. You don't get to benefit shop and then have enclaves where you do things your own way. You don't get kowtowed to when you come to my house. You say, thank you for letting me in. Thank you for the political security. Thank you for the economic opportunity. And now we will try to assimilate into your culture publicly while we do whatever we want privately as long as it doesn't break the law. It's kind of the American approach, and it's worked brilliantly, if bumpily, but we've assimilated 300 million people. An extraordinary number. That's how you do it. You don't ignore it and say unfettered, unassimilated immigration. And then to Ed Miliband, I mean, breathtakingly dim, the self-harm of the Green New Deal. And Trump was mentioning this in Davos, that, look, Germany got rid of its nuclear plants so Angela Merkel could win an election in the Länder of Baden-Württemberg, which was voting. The Greens were rising after the Fukushima hysteria, got rid of its nuclear program, and congratulations, you now have 5 times the energy costs of America and multiples of China. Ed Miliband is trying to make it so that British have to have an industry fighting with one hand tied behind its back. And then for all this, if you mention any of this, the civil rights make me want to get my musket. I have the Udon bust in my house, Stephen, of Jefferson, and I worship it. I mean, talk about ancestor worship. Mine would be to Jefferson. And the more Keir Starmer goes along, the more I see the differences. I grew up in the UK. I went to St Andrews University. I love the UK. We have clients in the UK. I lived there for 10 very happy years. I adore it. It's the only other country I might fight for, and he's ruining it. Absolutely ruining it. Every Republican says this, not with any joy, but with sorrow. And the Chagos Islands are a great example. International law, I would say what Marco Rubio said of the UN. I don't care what they say. I don't care what some lawyer says. I care about the special relationship that we need the base at Diego Garcia. And you're committing self-harm, suicide, by giving it to a bunch of people who've never owned the base, who are allies with our greatest enemy, China. And nobody finds this weird? Nobody finds this absolutely breathtakingly insane? We do, as Donald Trump says. And the special relationship has to work both ways, as relationships do. And Keir Starmer is selling the silver to pay the butcher bill here. This is rubbish. And the bottom line is it's doing self-harm to a relationship that has stood this test of time. I live in the UK. I'm well aware of the tensions between us, even as we're cousins. We're cousins who've been stuck together at Christmas for too long. But like Butch and Sundance, we bicker, we fight, but we come out shooting the Bolivian army together, and he's endangering that. So I can't tell you what a big deal this is to us, but our prediction for this year is he won't see the end of the year, given the dire numbers. If you write a mean tweet about him, I shouldn't be sent to jail because you're messing with my civil liberties. I got to know from the British government advising me that this was the new rule, not me personally, but in general. And I wrote, I'm getting my musket and my picture of Thomas Jefferson. Come and get me. Because law only matters when it's backed up by serious force, not when a bunch of human rights lawyers kowtow to radical leftists who ruin British foreign policy. I can't tell you what a calamity this is for everybody. It's time that man saw the back of the door.
The incredible thing about the Chagos deal, you talk about Starmer selling the silver. We're actually paying Mauritius tens of billions of pounds for them to have sovereignty over the island. I mean, it's incredible.
Exactly, because I'm sorry. Exactly. And it's just left-wing kowtowing to third worldism. Somebody's read The Wretched of the Earth too much. And it's just breathtakingly self-harming. They must be laughing their heads off. That's all I can say at the stupidity of this. And this is where being naive and stupid isn't okay, and we can just roll our eyes, Stephen, and go have a coffee. This is where it's dangerous because they're harming the relationship with America. They're harming British geostrategy, and they're economically emasculating you when the last thing you need is being paying the money to a bunch of leftists who are allies with the Chinese. I can't begin to tell you how stupid this looks from outside.
Okay, final question. What do you say to the Europeans who view Donald Trump as the great Satan? He's erratic, he's threatening to invade sovereign countries in Europe, Greenland, the example, and he could have just got this deal by negotiating, by being peaceful, by being, following this rules-based order that's existed for decades. How do you respond to those Europeans who are genuinely concerned about Donald Trump, who see him as this great evil president?
Well, first, how very convenient. You don't have to look in the mirror. It's all Trump's fault. I mean, this is absolutely breathtaking. I mentioned all the follies of Europe. Rather than have a renaissance in their own area, it's all the fault of Orange Man Bad. This is just ridiculous. It's a desperate way to avoid responsibility. Europe is vacillated, but that's because of itself. It's not Donald Trump. Donald Trump, like many historical figures, is surfing the wave of the times that he lives in. At the edges that great men can move it. I agree. I subscribe to that extent to the great man theory, but no more. He is a symptom of these changes, not the cause of He didn't surround in the basement at Mar-a-Lago with Barron and said, oh, let's play Risk. How can we ruin Europe today? This is ridiculous. This is Europeans desperate to avoid their economic illiteracy, their political weakness, and their military non-existence. And so that's what I'd say to them. Look in the mirror. The political risk is there. It's not with Donald Trump. Is he taking advantage of European weakness? Why in the world shouldn't he take advantage of European weakness? And let's end with a point about the rules-based system. Barack Obama, in terms of their fairy tale that Europeans seem to live in their Wilsonian fairy tale, the New York Times, Bremer, the rest of them, Ferguson, share, would say Barack Obama is perfection, he's God, and Trump's the devil. Okay, that's the eschatology of this here. Okay, so what does this mean? Obama wore beautiful suits. He could construct off the top of his head beautiful paragraphs, well-founded paragraphs. By the way, never with an action verb, as he's a Wilsonian, never an action verb to be seen. And he negotiated on a variety of fronts using the rules-based system. He said to the Europeans, would you spend more money on defense? No, nothing happened. He said to the Europeans, would you have a trade deal with us? No, we'd have to give up our farmers playing bull and retiring at 12 and protecting their lazy markets. And so we did nothing about that. He said, can we count on you in a variety of strategic situations? No, we have other things to do. He accomplished nothing. He is the poster child for the futility of a rules-based system. Everybody loved him, and he accomplished nothing because it's not the reality of the world. The reality of the world is Trump. Whether you like him or not, American interests, British interests, French interests, German interests, blood and treasure driving foreign policy. And instead of running a grad school seminar at which Obama was fantastic and accomplishing nothing, Donald Trump is in this to get things done. As he said, I could be playing golf with my grandkids. I've come back to try to make America great again, and every country should try to make itself great again. To pretend otherwise is simply to have read the New York Times for far too long.
Okay, John, thank you so much for joining us.
My pleasure. Thank you.